In a dramatic and shocking turn of events, Tiffany Henyard's once unassailable image as Dalton's mayor came crashing down. The courtroom was thick with tension as evidence of her involvement in bribery, backdoor deals, and the misuse of taxpayer money flooded the room. Leaked emails, secret recordings, and financial documents unveiled the truth behind Henyard's rise to power. The woman who had once stood at the pinnacle of local politics, her face adorning billboards and her words carefully crafted to avoid scrutiny, now sat frozen, pale and defeated, as the reality of her actions sank in. Her rise to power, marked by political maneuvering and an image of unshakable confidence, had fooled many, but the truth had caught up with her in a spectacular way. As the room absorbed the bombshell revelations, the once proud mayor, who had ruled with a mix of charm and fear, found herself exposed for the fraud she was. Her carefully curated political empire, built on manipulation and deceit, was now unraveling. Before the eyes of Dalton's residents, who watched in stunned disbelief. In a fit of rage, Henyard slammed her fist on the table with such force that the sound echoed through the room, her chair screeching across the polished floor. She leapt to her feet, her eyes blazing with fury. "This is a setup!" she shouted, her voice cracking with frustration. But no one in the courtroom was moved by her outburst. The judge's gavel pounded down with authority, silencing her. Yet Henyard persisted, her accusations growing more desperate as she turned her ire towards the prosecution. "This is political. You don't want a strong woman." The irony of her words was thick in the air. Here was a woman who had used her power to bully local officials, inflate salaries, and funnel taxpayer money into dubious projects, now trying to cast herself as a victim. Her attempt to salvage her image continued in classic Henyard fashion. She spun the narrative of martyrdom, as if the weight of the truth was somehow a political attack on her. When that didn't work, she turned on her own lawyers, her voice dripping with contempt. "You were supposed to handle this," she yelled, her eyes blazing with anger. One lawyer shuffled awkwardly through papers, clearly embarrassed, while the other refused to meet her eyes. The cracks in her carefully constructed empire were now glaringly evident, and it was clear that Henyard had no more deflections or spin to offer. The truth had cornered her, and she was left without a way out. In a shocking move, Henyard grabbed her designer handbag, ripped off her microphone, and stormed out of the courtroom. The room was left in stunned silence as her exit echoed through the courthouse. The once unstoppable mayor of Dalton was fleeing, and for the first time, it was clear that the power she had wielded for so long was slipping away. But the drama didn't end there. As Henyard pushed through the doors of the courthouse, the media swarmed her, pressing for answers. Questions about leaked recordings and missing taxpayer money bombarded her. But Henyard remained silent, her face a mask of defiance. Security tried to keep reporters at bay, but the press was relentless. The questions kept coming. "Mayor Henyard, do you have a comment on the leaked recordings? Is it true that millions of taxpayer dollars are missing? Will you resign after today's hearing?" Just as it seemed Henyard might escape into her car, a voice cut through the noise. A woman stepped forward, blocking her path. It was the former treasurer of Dalton, the woman who had resigned months earlier, citing suspicions of mismanagement and unethical conduct. Her eyes burned with fire as she faced the woman who had once controlled everything. "Do you think you can run from this now, Tiffany?" The former treasurer spat, her voice sharp with accusation. For a brief moment, Henyard seemed caught off guard, but the press, sensing an opportunity for more drama, turned their cameras on the confrontation. This was a twist no one expected. A former insider, someone who had been with Henyard in the trenches, now turning on her and calling her out in public. The media cameras clicked away frantically, capturing every moment. The people of Dalton, who had been manipulated and betrayed for so long, watched with bated breath. Had the truth finally caught up with Henyard? Had the once powerful mayor finally been cornered? the scene felt like the final act of a long, painful saga, and the crowd waited to see if Henyard would try to deflect, or if, for the first time, the truth would finally be the victor. Henyard stood at the center of the storm, the media, the former treasurer, and the public all watching. For the first time she seemed unsure of herself, her previously unshakable confidence now faltering. The people of Dalton had watched this drama unfold for months, but now they found themselves on the edge of history. Would this be the moment they finally saw their city free from the grip of its controversial leader? The air crackled with anticipation, and the crowd, eager for justice, could only wait to see what Henyard would do next. The walls of Henyard's empire had crumbled, and with each passing second, it became clearer that she could no longer escape the truth. The showdown outside the courthouse, with the former treasurer confronting her, was the final blow in a battle Henyard could not win. The media frenzy, the anger of the people, and the exposure of her corruption had brought her to this point of no return. The people of Dalton, once duped by her charm and promises, were now left to rebuild their trust in local government. As Henyard's political career spiraled towards its dramatic end, the future of Dalton remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: the people had finally taken back the power that had been stolen from them. Justice had arrived, and Henyard's reign was over. Administration, a key figure in her corrupt network. The news hit like a bombshell. Her top financial advisor, the person who had helped orchestrate many of the illegal dealings and funneled the missing taxpayer money, was now under investigation and facing arrest. This was the breaking point. Henyard's empire was collapsing, faster than she had ever imagined. As the news spread, the media swarmed the courthouse steps, eager for any scraps of information they could get. They bombarded every person exiting with questions about the ongoing investigation, but no one had more to say than the reporters chasing the story about the arrest warrant. The people of Dalton had finally found their voice. For so long they had been silenced by Henyard's power and fear tactics, but now they were making themselves heard. The chants grew louder and more insistent. "Lock her up! Justice for Dalton!" The once proud mayor who had stood at the helm of their city was now the target of their fury, and the shift in power was palpable. It wasn't just a battle for the truth anymore. It was a collective stand for accountability and justice. Inside her car, Henyard could hear the distant chanting, but the weight of the moment left her in a daze. She had been so confident in her control, so sure that her carefully constructed image could withstand any storm. But now, as the walls closed in, she realized the truth. She was not the unshakable force she once believed herself to be. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, it wasn't just one of her loyal aides trying to calm her down. It was a message from a former ally, someone who had once been at her side in the darkest moments. The message was simple but chilling. "They're coming for you. Everyone's turning on you." Henyard's heart sank. The realization that her own circle of power was unraveling sent a wave of panic over her. She looked at the blank screen of her phone, the messages piling up, but she couldn't bring herself to respond. There was nothing left to say. Her political career was over, and the very people she had once manipulated were now coming after her with the evidence they needed to bring her down. In the media frenzy, the arrest warrant was just the beginning. The truth, amplified by whistleblowers, and the constant stream of leaked information was now a tidal wave. Social media exploded with hashtag campaigns, images of her corrupt dealings, and videos of her threats. The very tools she had once used to manipulate the narrative were now her undoing. The former treasurer's testimony had been just the spark, but the flood of whistleblowers, former employees, and anonymous sources coming forward painted a clearer picture of the corruption that had festered under her leadership. The authorities, who had once turned a blind eye to her actions, were now gearing up for a full-scale federal investigation. The arrest warrant for her financial advisor set off a domino effect. With every new arrest, with every new piece of evidence, Henyard's sense of control continued to slip. Her top allies were crumbling. Her inner circle, once loyal and steadfast, now found themselves implicated and running for cover. The web of corruption was becoming clearer by the minute, and for Henyard, the worst was yet to come. As the news broke that her financial advisor was under arrest, Henyard's phone buzzed once more. It was a reminder of the storm closing in. The prosecutor's office was now preparing for her arrest, and federal authorities had already begun to sift through her finances. It was only a matter of time before the law caught up with her, and this time she would not be able to escape. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, the celebration continued. Dalton had not only exposed its mayor's deceit, but had become a symbol of justice in action. The once feared mayor had now been reduced to the hunted, her reputation in tatters, her empire crumbling under the weight of her own greed. The voices of the people of Dalton were louder than ever, and Henyard, for the first time in her life, was completely powerless. It had been a long, painful rise to power, and now her fall would be just as dramatic. The final arrest warrant for her financial advisor marked the end of a political era. Henyard had spent years silencing critics, manipulating the media, and controlling the narrative. But now, the truth was louder than ever. The people of Dalton had reclaimed their city, and the once unstoppable mayor who had ruled them with fear and deceit was now left to face the consequences of her actions. Tiffany Henyard, once the most powerful woman in Dalton, was no longer untouchable. The Tiffany Henyard sat frozen in her car, her hands trembling as she stared out at the growing crowd outside the courthouse. The chants of the people filled the air, rising in waves, each one a reminder of the justice they had longed for, the accountability that was now within reach. She had built her empire on manipulation, corruption, and a network of loyalists who had done her bidding for years. But now, that empire was collapsing. The FBI's involvement in the investigation was a blow that Tiffany had not expected. Federal authorities had a reach and power far beyond anything she had ever encountered. Her lawyer, who had stood by her side through so many scandals, now looked at her with a mixture of resignation and fear. His silence spoke volumes, and Tiffany's heart sank. "Fix this," she demanded, her voice tight with desperation. But he didn't respond. Instead, he just gave her that look, the one that told her there was no fixing this now. For the first time in her life, Tiffany Henyard realized that she was powerless. Her world, which had once been defined by careful spins of the narrative, intimidation, and smooth talk, was coming apart at the seams. The control she had once wielded was slipping from her grasp, and the weight of the investigation felt like a vice around her chest. The FBI's involvement meant that this wasn't just a local scandal anymore. It had gone national. The financial probe was now part of a much larger, more dangerous web, and more arrests were almost certain. People close to her, those she had once considered loyal, were already flipping, providing the authorities with critical information that further implicated her. Her political empire, built on backdoor deals and a network of deceit, was being exposed for all to see. No longer could she intimidate, manipulate, or control the narrative. The truth was out, and it was relentlessly tearing down everything she had worked so hard to build. As the crowd outside grew louder, Tiffany's grip on her phone tightened. Her mind raced with thoughts of how to escape, how to save herself from the inevitable downfall. Would she try to cut a deal with the authorities? Could she salvage anything from this mess? Or would she attempt to flee, to slip away before the hammer of justice fell? Every option seemed to come with its own risks, and every passing moment brought her closer to the end. The clock was ticking, and her options were rapidly dwindling. In the back of her mind, she knew that this was the moment of reckoning. She had spent years evading justice, twisting the truth, and pushing others down to protect her power. But now, there was no escape. The evidence was overwhelming, and the people of Dalton, who had been subjected to her rule for so long, were watching with a mixture of anger and satisfaction. They had waited for this moment, the moment when the truth would come to light and those responsible would finally face the consequences of their actions. Inside her car, Tiffany Henyard was trapped by her own choices. The world outside was changing rapidly, and with it, so was her fate. She was no longer the untouchable mayor who could spin any situation in her favor. Now, she was just a woman on the brink of losing everything, and no amount of manipulation or carefully crafted statements could save her. Outside, the chants grew louder. "Lock her up! Justice for Dalton!" The people were no longer just watching. They were actively participating in her downfall, cheering for the moment when she would finally be held accountable for her actions. And that moment was coming. Fast. The investigation was widening, and with the FBI involved, the stakes had never been higher. Tiffany Henyard's political career had been built on secrets, lies, and corruption. But now those secrets were exposed. And, as the truth continued to unfold, it became clear that her empire was no longer just collapsing. It was disintegrating entirely. She could feel the pressure mounting with every passing minute. There were no more excuses, no more lies she could hide behind. The truth had come for her, and it was coming faster than she could run. Would she face the consequences of her actions, or would she try to escape in one final desperate bid for freedom? The clock was ticking, and for Tiffany Henyard, there was nowhere left to hide.